give you a full list of the awards, the honors, the achievements of our final storyteller. We would be here for a very long time. Tracy Baim, whom many of us call the Queen of all media in Chicago, and Tracy is now recognized as the Queen of all gay media in the United States. Tracy has won awards after awards after awards because nobody in the United States has done so much for the wide range of media that we all rely upon. And we're honored to have Tracy here in Chicago. In addition to all of that, we can talk about Halls of Fame, we can talk about Lifetime Achievements, we can talk about Peter Lipper Awards, we can talk about movies she's produced, plays she's produced. In addition to all of that, Tracy's dedication to archiving and maintaining the history of our community is quite remarkable. And I've known Tracy from her very first days as a journalist in Chicago, and I've had the joy, as many of us have, of watching as she has made maintaining and preserving our history a major priority. Because, as you know, much has happened in our complex communities in the last 20, 30 years. And because of Tracy's work, we're going to all be remembering it, the good and the bad. We're thrilled to have, telling her very first story, please welcome Tracy Baim.
Public embarrassment failure. So I had a lot of things I wanted to tell, and then this morning I tested it out of my partner, and she said, no, that's probably not going to work. I was going to tell the history of typesetting. Because in reality, half the reason I'm in media is because I loved typesetting in high school. And I, at 10 years old, helped my mother lay out issues of the Chicago Defender. So I actually really love the physical side of newspapers, and I hope they stay in a physical form for a very long time. I have hot lead burns from hot lead typesetting machines at Lane Technical High School in 1976. So it was actually going to be a good story, but I'm not going to go there. I'll do that on the internet somewhere. So I was now I talked to David and I said, well, I'll tell a little bit about the founding of Windy City Times and the drama the Chicago 1980s gay community, which is absolutely no different than the drama of the 20-teens of this time. But you know, so I started in 1984 at Gay Life newspaper. I was born and raised Chicagoan, but I had gone away to school for 4 years to Des Moines, Iowa, to get my journalism degree. And I had a choice to make coming out of college. One of them was to be a typesetter. I truly wanted to be a typesetter, and thankfully I did not choose that career because it was dead in 2 years. As opposed to media in 30. And then I had a choice to go to the mainstream media, which my stepfather worked in Chicago Tribune and my mother worked in alternative media. So I had these two different role models. My mother in alternative media, no money but freedom. My dad in the Tribune, where everything was stifling and horrible, and then eventually Sam Zell came. So those are two tracks to go. And so I was openly gay in high school and college, and I wasn't going to go back in the closet. In 1984, you really could not be an openly gay journalist in the mainstream media. There were one or two people in the entire country, Randy Shields being one of them in San Francisco, that could actually be openly gay. And my stepfather had been at the Tribune at that point probably about 20 years, and he had gay friends at the Tribune, and he told me I couldn't work at the Tribune and be openly gay, meaning he was warning me that they would never accept me. So I did a few freelance gigs for the Chicago Tribune on like home heater safety. And my mother found out that there was an opening for a part-time position at Gay Life newspaper. In Des Moines, Iowa, there was no gay press. I didn't really understand there was a gay press until I graduated college. And so within a month of graduating with this news editorial degree, I was working at Gay Life newspaper, and it's because I could run the typesetting machine. It was maybe almost as big as that, I think. And it was a photographic machine that was a huge leap forward technologically from the hot lead machines. I'm telling you, it was just a dream to be able to do this. It was the precursor to HTML coding. take photos, and I could write, and I could edit. So really, I think it's almost no different today. If you can do video and audio and all this stuff, you're just more employable in media. So I got a part-time job there, and it turns out, just prior to me getting there had been 2 sexual discrimination lawsuits that women had filed because they did not feel that they were treated fairly financially or in any other way, really working at Daylight newspaper. It wasn't just because we were located right next door to the men's bathhouse at all. But I think it was just the culture of 1970 Chicago that the divisions within the lesbian and gay community back then, right prior to my starting in '84, were really severe. You know, and women were rightfully very upset with being tokenized and treated badly, and just like all the things that we face in the community now. But what changed in 1984, and I feel the biggest honor that the moment in time I was born in 1963 brought me to the moment in time in 1984 where our community was about to experience this dramatic shift in all of our lives. There were fewer than 100 cases of AIDS in 1984 in Chicago that were diagnosed. There were probably many more people who had it, but in 1984, they had just developed the test for HIV a couple months before I started. And people were just starting in Chicago because it hit Chicago, the waves hit Chicago just a little bit behind the coast. So New York and San Francisco and LA had already experienced pretty large-scale passages within their community, but Chicago was really just, that was just happening. And I was 21 years old and I felt like I had been dropped into the middle of a war zone. A war zone of politics, meaning the divisions along race and class and gender in our community, but certainly a war zone of death. I was covering people who were dying, who were my age and just slightly older. I was covering serial killers that were targeting our community, mainly from within. We had people who were, so oppressed within their own lives that they killed people they had sex with because they couldn't live with themselves. And AIDS. And AIDS was something that I still to this day can't believe that anybody psychologically survived that lived through that. That saw what we saw in the middle of a vibrant, bustling Chicago community that ignored it. And to be in media, for me, meant that I was friends with people in a small community, whether it's Des Moines, Iowa, or Chicago. If you're covering a small niche community within that community, you know everybody. And you begin, I know most of the people in this room, you begin to get acquaintances and friendships with people, and we had colleagues at our paper as well. So Windy City Times, so I started at Gay Life in '84, May or June of '84, and 18 months later, a group of us left Windy City Times to start, Gay Life newspaper to start Windy City Times. That's a whole other story I'm not going to go into because that was drama. So Windy City Times started, Jeff McCourt, Bob Bearden, who were partners, Drew Bananish, our art director, and myself as managing editor. I was 22, we founded Windy City Times. We did it, and I just drove by the apartment today. It was in a third floor walk-up on Melrose Avenue. Was Jeff and Bob's apartment. The typesetting machine was in the basement. It was the basement. We had broken windows. People were, I had Georgia Harper, Tony Armstrong Jr., and Lynn Hall were freezing their fingers off all winter typesetting the paper with dust blowing in. We had to run this stuff up to the third floor. And so here we are, dreaming the dream. We're starting this newspaper in the middle of an epidemic. And we knew that it wasn't an objective thing that you could do. You had to be just as angry and mad as Danny Sotomayor and everybody else about this epidemic, but still make sure you told their stories. Make sure you wrote their obits, because nobody else was writing their obits. The Tribune would write obits and they would deny who we were if they wrote an obit at all. They wrote obits for their own employees that they denied who they were. There were 4 prominent Chicago Tribune reporters who my father knew who died of AIDS, and it did not say that in their obits. So we knew how important what we were doing was back then. I almost felt like I was seeing 50 years on, and I wanted to make sure those stories, every single person I met, their stories were in the paper so that someone was looking. 50 years from now, they could see that. Because 50 years before 1984, when I started, was 1934. We don't have those stories of our community. Very few stories survived from the 1930s about our community. So I always felt like I was in the middle of this pivot point of our community, and it was so important to get everybody's story down. Within a few weeks of Windy City starting, Bob, the 4th co-founder, started getting sick. And one of our writers, Richard Cash, pretty young man, couldn't stand the thought of living with this disease, because in 1985 there was nothing. There was nothing to be done. And he got diagnosed and died within 7 days. He was really good friends with Bob, and Bob took that really, really hard. Bob was also a very handsome, strong, sturdy man. He was the reason I really left gay life to start Windy City Times. He was our sales manager, the very charismatic guy. And he and Jeff were partners, but they fought, and they fought, and they fought. And we were working out of their apartment, and they were fighting constantly. It was horrible, horrible experience for everybody around. It was traumatic. And I said to myself, if Bob goes, I go. I'm leaving, because I couldn't be there if he wasn't there. And Bob did eventually die, and I left to start a publication called Outlines. And Jeff McCourt, my other co-founder, I think Drew was already left pretty soon after we started. Jeff and I fought for 13 years. For 13 years, Jeff McCourt and I never said a word to each other. We fought and we fought and we fought in this community for a different vision. We had different visions. Not necessarily always competing visions, but different visions about what media was and what we did. And I think it made both of us fight harder and stronger. He always succeeded, and I always failed, but somehow, I think Art Johnson came here to me to a cockroach one time and as a compliment. Because he said, when everybody else is gone, you're going to still be... Started in June of 1987. We started Black Lights on newspaper. We started on Levita newspaper. We did Night Owl. We did all these really fun things, and none of them ever made a nickel. And I never was in it for that. I think that's why it was lasting longer than everybody else. The money was there in the 90s, and it all went to Windy City Times. And unfortunately, it created a lot of trauma within Windy City Times, and we were kind of just watching from the sidelines. In 1999, he suffered a staff walkout, similar to when we left to start Outlines, but this one was much more devastating. He called me the day it happened, and he said, Tracy, you know, this was always your baby. And I said, you know, Jeff, I wish you luck. They fought each other. We had 3 weekly newspapers for a year in this community, Chicago Free Press, Windy City Times, and us. I told my staff, just breathe. It's gonna be a war. It's going to be a much worse than when we were fighting with Jeff. And it was. They sued each other. People were stealing newspaper bundles. People were blocking. They were, newspaper blocking. They were doing everything. And Jeff won the battle. He won the lawsuit, but he lost the war. He had to close his paper in August of 2000. And again, he called me, and he said I was the first one to call. And I said, Jeff, I'll buy that paper for the number I can only prove, because I said I don't trust you. I said I'll buy it for your national ads value in 1 year, because I can call your ad agency and find that number out. And again, I could go on and on. But eventually, a few weeks later, his lawyers convinced him this was the right thing to do, and it happened. So I was able to get back in, end of 2000, Windy City Times, and I'd like to say I was like getting my foster baby back. So thank you very much for letting me.
Please know that if I ever refer to Tracy as a cockroach, because I always said that Tracy was the most determined newspaper person anywhere. And what I said was, if the end of the world comes and there's nobody left but cockroaches, there will always be a newspaper published by Tracy. Tracy has a cart with stone, with a hammer on a piece of stone, and hand delivered. Typesetting. There will always be a Tracy Baim newspaper. Tracy, thank you very much.
Congratulations, you are all part of history. This you so much for coming out tonight. I had a fantastic time. How about you?
Please start digging around on the story that you're going to tell. And I want to thank all of you, and I want to especially thank all our performers tonight. They all taught us a little bit more about sharing. And we share a lot with other folks, and after all, isn't that what community is all about? Thank you all for being. Stay, have a drink. Stay, have a conversation. Just because the sound goes down, you can't go into that bar from here, but you're welcome to go around, out, and back in. There's a whole other program going on over there. Or stay here and talk to each other and have a drink. Thank you all for coming.